I like following Rachel because she's the same, almost the same height as me. Good morning, everybody, and I'm, like everybody else, so appreciative of being on this wonderful land and for the very fact that it has been preserved so that we can appreciate its beauty and the wonders of Mother Nature, particularly in the fall as she gets ready to sleep. I just wanted to say a couple of things before we hear from our group of people here today. First wasn't that a remarkable evening last night? Isn't it? I mean, strong feminine wisdom and power and passion and love. I'm going to take that. I mean, if anybody ever asks me what we're going to need to negotiate our way out of our dilemmas, I'm just going to remember last night. So it was just so amazing. And I want to tell our visitors from other countries that last night something else happened that was truly amazing. A very wise, older woman, First Nations artist and singer won our most prestigious music award last night. This is, you may know her music because it is spread around the world. She's won Academy Awards for her music, but her name is Buffy Sainte-Marie. Yeah. And maybe something is happening in our country, right? In Victoria, and then last night the music awards. And what you may not know is that last year the award, this music award, which is very prestigious and comes with $50,000, was won by an Inuit throat singer by the name of Tanya Tagat. So for 2 years in a row, we've been blessed in this country. It feels like something's vibrating. So what I'd like to do then to kind of move us into the session this morning is to give you, and one of the reasons I was late today was I was doing a lot of research because I wanted to present you, because the session is about social innovation, where we are now and where we're going. So I thought I would give you the latest definition of social innovation for those of you who have never heard of it, which could be many of you and would not be surprising, and I don't think you should fuss if you've not heard of the concept. But here's my definition. It is something old, something new, something borrowed, and something that blew in on the wind and the sea spray. And if you don't believe me, check it out by going outside and putting your ear to a tree or by touching the earth. What I want to present to you today is the mob, some members of the mob that I'm part of. And this is a mob that I call passionate amateurs. I don't know if you've heard, but Canada is full of passionate amateurs. Now, passionate amateurs are people who do what they do for two reasons. One, for love, and two, the other is for necessity. And it's this combination of necessity or urgency and love and caring that stimulates our ingenuity and our creativity and our innovation. And I believe that passionate amateurs occupy the sacred headwaters of social innovation. And you're going to meet today three members of this mob of passionate amateurs. And as Rachel said, we're not going to read their bios. And you know what? The bios do not do them justice. I could tell you things about them if you're interested. So after the session, just come and tell me, because they've been up to no good in their life. But the bio explains the good things of their life. But the reality is that what they're doing now is similar to what they did before and is similar to what they will do in the future, regardless of their position or their stature or their responsibility, because they are people who are full of deep wisdom and caring and passion. So I'm absolutely delighted to introduce you to the three of them, and I'm just going to name them right now. We're going to go in this order, I think. Stephen Huddard, Paul Lacerte, and Colleen McCormick. And I'm going to get out of your way. Stephen.
All right, well, here we go. On one foot, there we go. Let me. Well, I squelch. Bonjour, good morning, buenos dias. Elders, chiefs, visiting delegations, activists, academics, volunteers, hosts, welcome and hello, good morning. Before beginning, I want to acknowledge and thank the Tsleil-Waututh First Nation for welcoming us onto their traditional territory. This beautiful land that I've driven past and through so many times, and it's really wonderful to actually be here with people who live here in this place, and to thank you for looking after it and welcoming us. And I really particularly like to acknowledge Elder May Sam for her the opening song that you sang for us on Saturday night and again this morning. It to me expresses a wisdom and an age-old love of this place and of people that I think expresses the essence of what this conference is about, what the summit is about. And thank you, Dr. Lewis Williams and the organizing committee for putting this together and for inviting me to be here. And to all of you, thank you for your commitment to strengthening the resilience of people and places at this critical time. So, before we can examine social innovation's potential to foster resilient futures, which is the theme that we were asked to speak about, I want to speak for a moment about the context in which this is happening in Canada. And in particular, I would like to point to the all too evident but still inadequately acknowledged gap between Canada's view of itself as a nation founded on the principles of peace, order, and good government, and the altogether different reality that is evident in the history of colonization, broken treaties, and a genocidal residential school system. At the beginning of this summit, we heard from Elder Eugene Arcand of the Saskatchewan Tribal Council and a residential school survivor, a gentle giant whose honesty and grace, which is so often heard in the voices of the survivors, make room for the settlers among us, and yes, I am one of those, to take the first steps towards reconciliation. That first step, which is to accept responsibility for the true history of this country. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission that brought this history to light was a component of the settlement that the survivors themselves negotiated and insisted upon in order to ensure that all Canadians would understand what happened here. And to cite Lewis Williams, the survivor's testimony is the gift that we must reciprocate if we are to begin a new and better history founded on respectful relationships among our cultures and across generations. So, and as we've heard from several of you, I'm sorry I missed last night, I was here, you were there, and well, anyway, reconciliation is also called for in our relationship with the natural and spiritual worlds, where the pattern of colonization, commodification, and exploitation is threatening the life systems of the planet. So all of that is important to today's discussion, because if social innovation is to escape the charge that it's simply perpetuating the dominant systems it purports to change, then it has to answer this question. Is it introducing new mindsets, relationships, beliefs, authority structures, and resource flows to advance social and ecological resilience? In short, is it advancing reconciliation? Well, I want to try and answer that question by drawing some lessons from the work of the J.W. McConnell Family Foundation, for which I am privileged to work. Now, the history of philanthropic partnerships with Aboriginal people in this country is remarkably short. It can said to have been begun in an organized way with the first gathering on June 10th and 11th, 2008, of the group that became known as the Circle on Philanthropy and Aboriginal Peoples in Canada, or the Circle. It's a network for building relationships, learning, co-creation, and the exercise of collective commitment to reconciliation. Now, June 11th, 2008, of course, is the date that the Government of Canada made its apology to Aboriginal peoples for the residential school system. And since the Circle meeting began on June 10th, we like to think we were ahead of the government, although not by much. One of the first projects to emerge from the Circle was the Ashoka Changemakers Initiative in innovation in First Nations, Métis, and Inuit education. It was sponsored by 24 foundations and Indigenous associations, and identified over 200 ideas and practices and innovations in Aboriginal education. As Al said, many of them old, some new, some borrowed, some hybrid, but altogether a very promising landscape that had hitherto been invisible to many. And the process taught us a lot about working together, not least of which is the lesson that if we wanted to do it right, we had to take the time to develop proper relationships. It was then National Chief Sean Atleo who told us that the AFN could not endorse or support this work until we obtained consent from each of the regional chiefs. In the end, it took 2 years to carry out what was originally planned as a 9-month process. And don't let me leave you with the sense that it was the Indigenous people that were slowing that down, because it wasn't. It was us white folks who had the hardest time learning how to work in a circle with respect to tradition and multiple points of view and so on and so forth. So time and again, it was those non-Indigenous partners who had to set aside their assumed roles and beliefs in order to work together successfully. And one of the ways that we did that, and this comes back to social innovation again, was we used the practice of developmental evaluation. And we had a bicultural developmental evaluation. So an Aboriginal and a non-Aboriginal evaluator accompanied this process, guided us into understanding the other's point of view, reflecting back nuances that we may have missed, and ensuring that we stayed on track when things seemed really difficult to manage. So this kind of collaboration and this kind of innovation often benefits for that kind of learning, and a bicultural lens really helped us move forward through difficult and challenging times. Now, one of the 30 award-winning initiatives that this process surfaced was Dashinta. Everybody know about Dashinta? A few. So it's a land-based school in the Northwest Territories, and it illustrates several other principles of successful social innovations. At the time that we learned about it, it was led by 2 young women, founders of it, Kyla Kakfwi, the daughter of former Northwest Territories Premier Stephen Kakfwi, who was a Dene residential school survivor, and Erin Freeland Ballantyne, a settler born in the Northwest Territories, who was the first Rhodes Scholar to come from that territory. Now, Dashinta's courses are taught on the land by Northern elders and Southern academics working in partnership. And their courses are accredited by University of Alberta, University of Victoria, McGill, and others. And students begin their programs at home in their own communities. And they come to Dashinta with a problem, with a challenge, with something that they want to work on while they're there in the community of learners and teachers that they meet. They can also bring their children and grandparents with them. And the school welcomes them and provides programming for them and gives them roles to play in the learning community that Dashinta creates. We supported Dashinta with our Social Innovation Fund and worked with them to secure support from government and other foundations. And its goal, and it's very close to achieving this, is to become the first degree-granting institution in Canada's North. So as a social innovation, Dashinta demonstrates the power of land-based initiatives and of intergenerational and cross-cultural collaboration. And it also shows us that on the path to reconciliation, education is key, not only to ensuring that we understand our true history, but that that is a place where we forge the synthesis of learning, of arts and traditions that can strengthen future resilience. It also illustrates how philanthropic foundations have convening power that can bring governments and other sectors to the table. Let me cite one more example on the theme of education, and let me just check on the time. Okay, good. So this one comes from inner city Winnipeg, where we've formed a partnership with the community of Point Douglas, the provincial government, the business sector, United Way, and the Winnipeg Foundation to improve outcomes for children. Currently, 25% of the children born in this community of 50,000 people go into state care before they're 5 years old. And this is but one facet of the intergenerational trauma stemming from residential schools. And with nearly 11,000 children in care in Manitoba, it's a problem that's getting worse as time goes on. So the Winnipeg Boldness Project is a community-led initiative that is using a social labs approach to generate prototypes, new ways of working, to new demonstration projects, focusing on early child development and support for families. Diane Rusin, who heads it, left her position as the head of the largest social agency in the community, and she leads it with a researcher, a communications person, and an admin person who's the only non-Aboriginal on the team. But Boldness is more than those 4 people. It's a growing web of community leaders, early childhood educators, local businesses, and so on, and it's after 2 years of patient and careful work, it's developed 5 prototypes that address the challenge of raising children in Point Douglas. Number 1 is family-centered decision-making, with as many as 8 different ministries coming to an individual family with solutions and demands and forms to fill out and so on. The situation for a parent is one of living in toxic stress. Are these people going to take my children away from me? The second prototype, so the prototype there is family-centered decision-making, where those 8 people are told to go over there and stay put while the family figures out what its priorities are, and when they know, those agencies come into the room, they hear what the family's priorities are, and they organize to support that, putting the family at the center and putting them in charge. And I know this model has been developed and implemented successfully in New Zealand. We're learning from that, and so that's number 1. Number 2 is hubs of community leadership, pulling together community strengths and places where those essential conversations about how are we doing and how can we influence and how can we help is number 2. Number 3 is men's groups. I look around this room and I see so many women, and I'm so honored to be here among you, but we do have to make room for the men in this conversation, don't we, Paul? I'm wearing my patch, okay. The third is transportation solutions. Mobility is such a challenge for a single mom with 4 kids in the middle of winter to get from school to the doctor, to the welfare office, to the community center. It's practically impossible. The fourth is total community support for enrolling children in something called the Canada Learning Bond, to give every child a college-bound identity and to engage the entire community in helping that happen. And incidentally, that involves transferring the $1.2 billion that sits in Ottawa that is supposed to be in the bank accounts of low-income families' children across the country, but for which there is no strategy and no budget. The money is sitting there when it should be here in your community, $2,000 per child. So Winnipeg is leading in prototyping a community-wide approach to helping that happen. So this project highlights some other dimensions of social innovation: community leadership, the use of a solutions lab to generate and refine prototypes and solutions, and the simultaneous engagement of multiple scales in the system. So from community to senior government officials, all are present and observing and taking part in shifting this system. It uses a collective impact approach, another social innovation, to ensure that every sector of the community is involved, from university researchers to community activists, business community, and so on. So what this does, though, and it's important, is it de-risks experimentation for the government. Big government ministries have a hard time doing this kind of work, and so this takes it and moves it into the community. Government is watching and supports the process, but isn't at risk of, doesn't experience the reputational risk that goes with doing this kind of work. So it's not without its challenges, of course. One of those is the question of finance. And investment in large-scale shifts in early intervention and new models is beyond the scope of government budgets that are managed under austerity regimes, as so many are these days. And so some fear, and to some extent I think they're right to do so, that things like social impact bonds might lead to the privatization of public services. But if we guard against that, or at least its excesses, it's hard to see why we would not use every resource at our disposal to move systems towards resilience, especially given the tragic and worsening state of the status quo. So I'll give you quickly an example of social finance doing good and doing well in the Foundation's partnership with the Huron of Quebec. And this is about housing on reserves. It's in a deplorable state, by and large, and doesn't have a good solution. When people don't own their own homes and can't borrow against them, can't invest in them, when they're essentially at the risk of being moved out of their homes, depending on who's elected to band council, it creates a situation where, as we see across the country, we have housing that is substandard and where health, education, and all kinds of outcomes for kids are not what they should be. So housing is fundamental. The Huron have developed a solution to this in a community-operated mortgage fund that lends to community members and supports them in building their own homes, which they own not land title to, but that they own. They can buy, sell, trade up, trade down, and it's a very successful model. They've got 400 of these. Not a single mortgage is in arrears. And there's a new trade school teaching local kids to be electricians, plumbers, carpenters, and other reserves are sending kids there to learn how to become those professionals. So in wanting to share this model with other communities, and there are several other reserves that want to do this, there was no way to do that. There was no money for this. There was no administration for it. And so in partnership, we've created a fund that is building houses now on 5 other reserves using this model. And as we did this, over the 2 years that we developed the partnership and we put grant funding into it and eventually made an investment into it, we managed to convince the federal government to match that. We got RBC to come in and put some funding in, and the Community Forward Fund. So we built a $2 million fund to build 10 houses. And as we were doing it, we found that there's a $300 million First Nations Mortgage Guarantee Fund in Ottawa that has built less than 50 houses in 7 years. So again, prototyping, investing, putting money to work to demonstrate possibility has tremendous opportunity and tremendous power. And even though we don't have a lot to work with, by pooling what we've got to demonstrate possibility, we can shift larger systems. So I want to just use those as quickly as examples of the very, very quickly expanding field of Aboriginal-focused or Indigenous social innovation. In November 18th, and from this November 18th to 20th in Winnipeg, in partnership with the National Association of Friendship Centers and Canadians for a New Partnership, we're going to hold the first national summit on Aboriginal innovation. And I invite you all to come. You can find the website at the NAFC. The information's on the NAFC website. And I think it's a very hopeful and promising time we live in, and want to encourage your continued work. I want to just close with a quote. This is from George Manuel, Shuswap chief and peace warrior, who in his autobiography wrote, "When we come to a new fork in the road, we continue to follow the route with which we are familiar, even though wholly different, even better avenues may open up before us. The failure to heed a new approach to Indian-European relations is a failure of imagination." Now, he wrote that 20 years ago. And I think the work that you're doing today, the work that we see emerging in communities in Canada and around the world, suggests that perhaps George Manuel had greater reason for hope. The fork in the road we face today is called reconciliation, and coming together as equals in the places where we live to explore, learn, and adapt together in pursuit of our common resilience. That is the work of social innovation of all of us. Thank you. God bless. Miigwech.
Deneza kan tikeza greetings to all of our aunties and uncles, all of our cherished relatives here. Paul Lacert Satni, Mark Spa, Merlin Slu, Nasl de Hatzian, Sophie Keratlo, Alu Sagana Lachsamasiu in Jan Yen Kaktane Keoch. So I belong to the Caribou clan in the Carrier Nation in north central British Columbia. Mark and Marilyn is my mom and dad, and Sophie Keratlo is my grandma, for whom I get my clan membership. And Nasl Deach is my late grandpa, and he picked up that name. It was sleeping for 3 generations, banned in through the potlatch system. And so he, to get the potlatch going to get that name, to wake it up after this 3 generations, Nasl Deach, he had to sell his pickup truck so that he could get enough food to make the pile on the middle of the potlatch big enough that the clan members could not see each other across the potlatch hall. And 4 years ago, he honored me to begin training to become Nasl Deach, and he passed away this year. And so I'm 4 years into a 5-year training process to become Nasl Deach. And I also don't have a lot of money, so I think I'm gonna have to sell my truck to be able to afford the potlatch. So that's a little bit who I am and where I come from. Tebe su unzin inja tseot keoch gan daicho. So I wanted to acknowledge the people of this territory and the elected officials and the hereditary chiefs and the elders who took care of this place for so long, and to say that I'm very honored to be here. And like my brother Stephen, just so humbled to be in the room with so many knowledge keepers and so many elders. And it's counterintuitive for me to be talking to you. I feel like I should be sitting on the floor and listening to you. So I'm here in as the most humble way possible to share a few simple things that I hope can be of some value. Why am I here is I'm a first-generation residential school survivor. I grew up in an alcoholic home, and we have casualties in our family as a result of colonization in the residential school system and pain. And I want a better future than the past that we've had. And I want to undo what those forces have tried to take away from us. And for me, it boils down in the most profound way to love. That those forces have tried to disrupt the love connection between parent and child, primarily through the forced removal of children and the forced re-education of our children in a paradigm that is profoundly different than ours and profoundly destructive to Indigenous ways of knowing and being, to the survival of Indigenous ways of knowing and being, and that the love connection through parent-child, and the love connection between men and women, you know, and to disrupt that love. And it's weird because we live in a society where people are uncomfortable to talk about love. So I'm in a love revolution. I'm like, talk about love all the time. My my wife asked me what we were going to do at the event today, and I said we're going to make love. And then she just smiled and shook her head. Oh my God, Paul. don't say that, whatever you do. So, so I want to practice that. I want to say in our language, because I know that we're in that canoe together, you know, we're trying to give something of ourselves to lift up the people around us. And we're trying to be as wise about that as possible so we can draw the straightest line between where we're at today and where that reimagined, desired way of being for our people is, you know. And what I appreciate is the opportunity to practice that and live it. And this event is nurturing that, giving us ideas about how to practice and live that. So I'm in the moment kind of a guy. And in our language, we say, because we're in that same canoe together, I can authentically say to you, Nian spe hunzu. When you say it in your language, sometimes it means something a little bit different. Nian spe hunzu. And what that means is, you are so beautiful to me that my heart leaps up when I look at you. Nian spe hunzu. Okay, we're in that canoe together. Nian spe hunzu. So I want you to say that with me. Nian spe hunzu. Nian spe hunzu. Yeah. Nian spe hunzu. And if you say that to your family members, I encourage you to say that to your family members when you see them, male and female and intergenerationally. Look them in the eye. Nian spe hunzu. You're so beautiful to me that my heart jumps up inside me when I look at you. And I feel like that way about our territories. Yinkak in our language is our land. Yinkak spe hunzu. That land is so beautiful to me. It's been taking care of us for so long. It's the topsoil is taking care of our ancestors and doing such an amazing job of taking care of our ones that have passed away. Right out the door here, it's such an honor to be so close to our ancestors that are buried in this community. Yinkak spe hunzu, the land is so beautiful to me that my heart leaps up. So I want to practice that here just for a moment, part of my 15 minutes, and ask you, so you know the idea of namaste, the light in me sees the light in you, or the light in me recognizes the light in you. So I want to ask you to look around at the people around you right now. And the light in you recognizes the light in that person. And I also want to invite you, for those who are comfortable, and this is not for everybody, so I offer my total respect for those who would prefer not to stand up and to make the love eyes at the person beside you, and to just have a hug of 2 or 3 people that are as close to you. Okay, that's good enough. Come on, you guys. Jeez. I feel like at church when it's the shake your hand, shake the hand. I like that part. Okay, good. Come on. Come on. Yeah. Ever crazy, you guys? Sit down. Holy moly. That's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. Yes. That's perfect. That's perfect. I'm okay for a few more minutes. Yeah. So it's just us chickens. It's just us chickens. We can make the exact life that we want. We can control our families. We can control our homes. We can influence our institutions. And we could make my own commitment in my own organization is to make it the most loving place that anybody has ever worked or anybody wherever will work in the future. In our home, we're a blended family. We have many casualties in our family. We have addiction on all sides of our family, self-harm. And so we sat down with our kids. We have 5 kids and 2 grandkids. And we sat down and imagined our desired future state, and it was a house full of happiness. The kids said, we want a house full of happiness. So we called our home, we named our home the House of Happiness, and we made team uniforms. House of Happiness member, you know, because these are the spaces that as we're innovating and we're bringing back our ways of being. Our way of being is to love each other unequivocally, and that's the medicine that we're born, that we need that medicine, and our culture, the things that I wanted to share with you is about how our culture is that medicine. And in my mind, Indigenous social innovation is the revitalization of Indigenous ways of knowing and being in practice in every aspect of our lives in a modern context. And there are some very sweet spaces that we need to innovate in that context, because there are so many barriers and limitations that have been placed on us that are practical and statutory and economic fiscal limitations for us to have the things that we need to revitalize Indigenous ways of knowing and being in our daily lives. Proximity to our territory, accessibility of elders that speak our language, the ceremonial things that require a connection to your home territory. So many of our people are mobile and do not have access to those things. So we need medicine. We need medicine. There is a very particular ailment that we are healing from, and it's the intergenerational effects of the residential school system, of the forced relocation and dislocation of our people from our territories, and the list goes on. So we need medicine. So many of our people are giving themselves medicine, but they're giving themselves the wrong kind of medicine. We are medicating ourselves all over the place, right? Gambling, alcohol, various forms of drugs, food. We're medicating ourselves with the wrong kind of food, sugar. You know, we're medicating ourselves all over the place, and what we're starving for, what our people are starving for, all of us, in the broadest sense, is the medicine that is in our culture, and using that as an umbrella notion is our connection to our land, our access to our language, the deep wisdom that our language offers us. Our ceremonies, practicing our ceremonies, you know, our songs, eating our traditional food, you know, our art, dance, our dances, our prayers, you know, listening to our aunties and our grannies, right? Canning berries, you know, that's the medicine that we are looking for. And in the absence of that medicine, for all sorts of reasons, it's not totally out of reach for us collectively to reclaim those medicines and to practice that medicine in today's context. So if we have this ailment and culture is the medicine for that ailment, then I would suggest that there is a proportional relationship between cultural integrity and the potency of the medicine, that there is a direct proportional relationship. And so the issue of cultural integrity becomes very challenging for us as we become increasingly mobile and as our languages increasingly disappear. And those elders who were raised in our language age, and we're short on apprentices. We're short on cultural learners. And so these spaces that nurture and ignite our commitment to protecting those things is so critical, you know? And I'll give you an example. So I'm so lucky to come from a ceremonial family. We have lots of problems and dysfunction in our family, but we also practice so many of our ceremonies. So one of the things that I got from Nasildech was singing. And he says, you have to sing that song. So culture as medicine, cultural integrity, and the specificity of, and the discipline in our protocols, and in our language, and in our songs, as an example, in our songs. He says, you have to sing that song just right, so that the people that used to sing that are gone, they will hear it and they'll recognize it and they'll come and sing it with you. That's why it works. Okay? So, example is one of the most important songs is the Calling In song. So I wanted to practice it now too with you. So how we think about it, or how my way of thinking about it, the Carrier North Central way, Indigenous practice to think about it is you think on the faces of your parents and your grandparents as far back as you can think on what their faces would have looked like. Okay, and it's a way to call them if you need their help. So they're there all the time for us. We're just sleeping to the fact that they're there for us, right? So you could close your eyes. If you want to try it now, you can close your eyes and think on the faces, and you can think on the genders, and I think on mother because of the water connection, the birth water, the fluid that keeps us alive for that 9 months. That water, the line of water all the way up through my mother's, all the way to my first mother. And I think on their faces, and I think if they're looking at us, they're all lined up on the other side, shoulder to shoulder, and they must be so proud of us for being together today and doing our best to give of ourselves to lift up other people. So our song goes like this, and this is to call them to help us. Way, oh, way, oh, oh, way, way, oh. We ah hey ho, we ha yo ho, we ha yo ho, we ho, yo hey ho, yo hey ho. We ha yo ho, we ha yo ho, we ho, we hoo. If they hear it, they recognize it, then they'll come and sing it with us. And then we won't feel alone. And part of that medicine that we're looking, part of our ailment is loneliness. You know, we're in a profoundly lonely society. It's crazy. People feel alone. We're never alone. That's the truth. We are never alone. Even if you're by yourself, we're never alone, right? And so, so I offer that to you as a practice of revitalizing Indigenous ways of knowing and being, to be able to close your eyes and think on their faces and think of that song, or sing in your own way, because they are there for us. And there are I think false pretenses that could cloud our path as we move towards Indigenous cultural revitalization, practicing Indigenous ways of knowing and being. And the suggestion that things have to be new and shiny is something that we need to resist, you know, and finding our way back into our desired future state. 2 more minutes, is it okay for 2 more minutes, Rachel? Okay, good. So the last thing I wanted to share is just a quick note about an effort that we have underway. One of our legacies that we're struggling with is the profound lack of respect for Indigenous women, and the unfettered aggression of our society against Indigenous women. And in this country, 1,200, 1,000 1,200 women. So that is not okay. That's not okay. So violence, ending violence against Indigenous women, you know. And as dudes, we have to do way more. We have to do a lot more as men. And I constantly witness women bearing the burden of abuse and the burden of advocacy to affect change in that space. And it's crazy. This is not a women's issue, it's a men's issue. And so we started this little campaign here called the Moose Hide Campaign, and I have some of these for you. And so I'll just end with just a brief story about this. So my daughter Raven and I hunting moose along the Highway of Tears up in our home territory. And she was gutting out that moose, and a lot of our women have gone missing and have been murdered along that stretch of highway. So we got the idea to tan up that moose hide, cut it up, and give squares around to men, and wear it like my brother Stephen is wearing his here, and then say that it's a commitment not to do any harm to the women and children in your life, but also to stand up and speak out, and not just to be neutral anymore, that we have to get active, and we need all the men to stand together and hold each other accountable and support each other in our healing. And so, so far we have distributed, since we started 4 years ago, we've distributed 100,000 squares of moose hide for men across the country. And we're actually working, a great example of a social innovation partnership. We're working in spirit and in planning with the McConnell Family Foundation and the National Association of Friendship Centers and other change makers to scale this up across the country, to distribute 1 million squares of moose hide, to get men across this country supporting each other, talking to the young men and their family, and being very specific about the issue of ending violence against all women in this country and children. And it was never in our culture to do that harm. It was in our culture to love and protect, cherish and respect the women and children in our life. And somehow that got flipped upside down. And we have to, if we're gonna have a desired future state, you know, it has to be so centered on healing that space, and creating a country where and a world where women are treated with love and respect at all times, you know. And yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to share a bit of emotion around that too, because I see people feel very sanitized about the statistics as it relates to our people, and there's nothing statistical about that, you know. So I have a couple of hundred of these to share if there's anybody that's interested, and there's a website here. We have 90,000 of these cards in stock right now, so if you ask, we can ship no cost as many as you would like to you and your organization, and ask that you call on the men to wear this every day. And then when somebody says, oh hey, you know, what's that thing you got there? You say, smile, and you'd be like, oh, I'm so glad you asked. Thank you for asking. It's a Moose Hide campaign, and I am standing up against violence towards women and children. It's not right. So anyway, with those thoughts, thank you so much for listening and the chance to be here with you today on my relations.
Thank you, Paul. As always, Paul has this incredible ability to just bring us into real space, human space, and we're just going to do a little
There's no graceful way to do it, people.
No.
I've thought about it, but
Yeah, thank you. And so, thank you. I'm privileged to be here as well, and I want to acknowledge the territory and all of the community spirit and all of the hard work that's gone into this gathering. And Louis, we met a few months ago and have spent quite a bit of time talking about what you're trying to do here. And as soon as you shared sort of your vision and your hope, there was no doubt that you're going to get incredible support, and you've brought all of these beautiful people together, and I thank you for that, and Auntie May and all the planning committee members. It has just been a blessing to be a part of this, and I'm honored to have a few minutes to get some perspective out here. In true sort of social innovation style, we tried to kind of move on the floor in the beginning, so we were talking with and among everybody here, because the wisdom isn't up here, it's actually all around us. Unfortunately, we're webcasting this, so that plan didn't work out so well, which is sort of true to social innovation. Always. I just want to start with a question. I've been in this space for a long time, so I'm a public servant. I've been in government for over a decade now, which is kind of shocking to me. I've been involved with social innovation informally more than I have been involved formally, and I sort of fell into it just by continuing to engage with my community and see problems and take some ownership of those problems and find ways to kind of address them. And I think at the heart of all of this activity is just this willingness to step in and do something. And I was able to engage in some community dialogues through a really inspiring program at UVic many years ago. Some of you may know this program, Uni 101 and 201. So it was a program designed for people who had experienced barriers to post-secondary education. And it was actually really quite democratic in terms of how that program was run, and some amazing minds, beautiful minds behind it. But you threw a syllabus together that sort of described a program. You would put it out to the students, and the students would decide whether or not they wanted that instructor in that subject. And I had the privilege of teaching on social innovation, how to change the world. And the people who came together to be involved in that program taught me what social innovation is really all about. And I don't think I've seen it so strong ever since. There was a comment made in the room, all of us have something to say, just some of us are never heard. One of the beautiful students there had said that to the group, and I thought, wow, if I can do anything in this space that counts, it's going to be to find a way to open up the opportunity for you to be heard. And I think that's been my mission ever since I've been involved in this space since then. And so how many of us in this room are still sort of trying to tackle what social innovation actually means? We try to put a definition around it, and I feel sometimes we don't do justice to what this is. So is there still confusion? Are people clear on what social innovation is all about? Just a sense of where you're at with this idea. Thank you.
I had one sense of social innovation before I came here. And now I have so many different ideas that I won't have a full sense of social innovation, I don't think, until I die. But what's going on here is precious.
I would agree. The moment we just had with Paul, that's the space we need to bring ourselves into to actually do the deep, hard work it takes to get to a new dialogue, to get new levels of commitment on the table, to bring our best selves forward. And despite the challenges, despite all of our sometimes personal challenges or our systems challenges, wherever we're coming from. Again, I'm in the public service, so you can imagine some of the challenges we're faced with trying to bring new thinking to the table. But what makes a difference is that moment of realness, that groundedness, that truthfulness that requires us to do better. And after all the years that I've been involved in this space, I now I've now gone back to the basics, so I thank you for kind of preparing this conversation. The basics really is around a fundamental question. Can we do better? And if we can do better, how do we start to do better? And I've been on, I guess, a quest to promote different ways of thinking with other public servants across the country and even in the world. And how do we start to look at all of the expertise we've gained throughout our experiences in life? How do we look at throw out the models, throw out the language, throw out all of the things that we think brings us into this special technical space to do things differently. I would, and I always encourage people to kind of let that go and just remember what it means to be human and what it means to just get to a new conversation. We have a dominant narrative in government right now, and I'm really trying to promote the change agents in government not to feed into it anymore. And this dominant narrative is all around how risk adverse we are and this fear of failure. And I sometimes feel that we can do more damage to ourselves by continuing to promote that thinking. Whether it doesn't even matter about government, any big institution. There's this conversation around risk adversity, and I ask the change agents to not feed into that anymore. Don't talk about how risk adverse we are. Talk about all of the beautiful ways we are doing things, leading new opportunities, and taking smart, thoughtful risks. Because if we start to do that, we won't be stuck not trying, because I think we have a lot of easy outs by using these excuses of what holds us back. Yes. And my father is a strong, stubborn Scottish man from Scotland, and he's taught me, get on with it. Just stop talking and get on with it. And I feel this is the time. There's so much energy happening in so many different communities, in so many different organizations, that if we connect and we somehow bring our networks together and our passions together, there is no stopping from achieving wonderful breakthroughs and advancements. And so with that in mind, I wanted to sort of take a different slant on the conversation, and it was to introduce an idea. And this is an idea that I would really love to build some... Am I still? Yes, some energy around and some focus. And if there are other members in true social innovation style who feel that this is an important opportunity and something they want to be involved with, then I am happy to do what I can to kickstart this initiative and work with anyone in this room and beyond this room who'd like to play a part in bringing this together. So the idea is really about building a social innovation protocol. And this idea came to me when I was attending a social innovation conference, Indigenous conference that you hosted a couple of years ago. And what happened to me when I was engaged in a circle, we were doing introductions and going through the protocol, and I was just amazed at how we get to this beautiful open space very quickly through that process. And given where we're at today, I wonder if we are as far along as we could be. And if we had some sort of tool, and I kind of hate the term tool because it kind of implies that you have something broken and you can just take this tool and fix it, and that's not what is happening in our world. But if we had some sort of guiding document that we could pull together that really talked about how we show up when we are talking about getting to a new place, getting to the potential of a social innovation opportunity. And this is based on Indigenous values and ways of being, and perhaps even the medicine wheel. It could be sort of the framework behind it. One of the challenges I've experienced, we talk a lot about sort of social innovation, but it's an outcome. And we start the conversation with the outcome, and I think that's why there's so much confusion in this space. It's an outcome of principles and practices, and it's an outcome of how people are actually contributing to the potential of change, deep change. And so if we go back to the basics and look at what are those core principles that require us to show up differently to address some of these challenges that we're facing, and what are the practices that we need to engage in and stay true to regardless of all the pressures in order for us to potentially get to this outcome. And so this was a sort of just my first stab at pulling some ideas together and to look at what are some of the core principles that I have found to be quite necessary for this space and that I've come across in my time in this space. And one of those principles, ultimately this is about dignity. And how do we help, again, solve some of these challenges in our community that seem impossible to solve? And they're not impossible to solve, but we need to start with the first principle of dignity, and that we're here to actually change the way in which our systems are producing some results. Can we do better? Yes, and here's how we can do better. Justice, vulnerability, if we're not willing to be vulnerable, if we're not willing to admit that we don't know the answer, we don't know where we're going, we don't know how we're gonna get there, but collectively, if we're together, we'll find a way. And all those pressures that are outside of this, we'll have to understand that this is the way we need to operate, we need to engage in order to get to a new space and new conversations. Wellness, so important to bring the spirit of wellness into this opportunity. And what does wellness mean? And I think there's so many traditional practices and deep knowledge that we can again pull from and set up as one of our guiding principles. Responsibility. Again, in government and this talk of innovation, it's quite frustrating that it's been lost in terms of what innovation is and what are the examples and how do you do it, and again, that risk adversity piece coming up. To me, innovation is just part of our responsibility, and it's part of our commitment to address some of these challenges that we're facing and going to continue to face, massive challenges, and make sure that the public has the best opportunity they can, and that we're setting up people for success, great long-term resiliency. And if we can do better, we have to do better. It's not about the how we get this innovation thing off the ground. It's just about a sense of commitment and responsibility to do better. Then we also have the togetherness, and I think that's really important, bringing people from different perspectives and different communities together. Oftentimes when I'm in certain social change meetings and a lot of community meetings, I'm always looking at where are the new voices, because it's oftentimes the same people that show up to the same events, the same conferences, the same conversations, and they're beautiful people committed, but if we're gonna have any opportunity to create change networks, we need to bring in those who aren't traditionally at those tables. They don't even understand those tables, and some of them may even be resistant to participating in those tables. We're stewards. We have to find a way to bring those voices in. The other side of this potential protocol would be around practices. What are the practices? We've learned so much over the last 100 years. What works? Why? What doesn't work? Are we really looking at making sure we understand? Have we taken the time to go back and really understand those best practices that have helped us get into these new opportunity spaces? Have we studied change as much as we could so that we understand all of those micro activities that have to happen in order for that change to kind of be realized? And so I think this opportunity for us to come together and create this social innovation protocol based on traditional principles and practices would be a really good opportunity to say, if you are willing and able to engage in this space and you have interest, we have to hold ourselves to the highest level of accountability. And in order to do that, we need to have some sort of document, some sort of framework that helps us show up in a way that we know we're gonna cut through a lot of that sort of early day, kind of messy, those challenges where we have to build trust quickly. We have to trust that emergence zone. We have to be okay with helping our senior executives and our board members and our community members that we're in this together, but we're in this for the right reasons with the right principles and practices to get us to the next stage. And I hope that a tool like this, or my vision around a tool of this nature, would help us hold something up to say, this is how we do it, and this is what we must stay committed to, and this is how we can also share better understandings of what this is all about. And I think always invite people into these principles and practices apply to everybody. There's no barrier to entry here other than you agree to respect the protocol. And so with that, if there's interest, I would love to continue this dialogue with Louis and many of the planning committee members and community members, and have it as inclusive as possible if this is something that we think could really help move social innovation forward in a powerful way. So I'll be happy to serve that process. Thank you.
Awesome.
I'm imagining this this contraption here is actually a beautiful piece of jade, right? I've seen on many people. So Louis gave me this very important task of being a discussant, and I think I'm having the same trouble that Nancy had last night with it. So I had to look up the definition. And a discussant is someone who doesn't get in the way of the path between the head and the heart. So, therefore, I invite you to do two things. First of all, thank these wise, beautiful, loving, caring people. And maybe take a brief moment to turn to somebody beside you or behind you or beside and behind you and tell them what you loved about this session. Thank you very much.